The elegant dining room of Chateau Blanc buzzed with the usual Friday evening energy. Crystal glasses clinked against fine china, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air. Marcus Johnson adjusted his black vest and smoothed his tie as he surveyed his assigned section. At 24, he had been working at this upscale restaurant for 3 years, and he took pride in his professionalism and attention to detail. The restaurant attracted wealthy clientele from the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. Marcus had learned to navigate the sometimes challenging dynamics that came with serving demanding customers, but he never let it affect his commitment to excellent service. Tonight felt no different from any other evening shift, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. Table 12 had just been seated with a party of 6. Marcus observed them from across the room as they settled into their chairs. The group appeared to be celebrating something special, judging by their animated conversation and the way they kept glancing at a woman in an elegant navy dress. She had her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly, and Marcus could tell she was several months pregnant. The woman's husband sat beside her, occasionally placing his hand on her shoulder with obvious affection. The other couples at the table seemed to be close friends, all well-dressed and clearly comfortable in the upscale environment. Marcus noticed expensive jewelry, designer handbags, and the confident way they carried themselves that spoke of privilege and social status. As Marcus approached their table with menus and water glasses, he caught fragments of their conversation. They were discussing baby names and nursery colors, confirming his suspicion that they were celebrating the pregnancy. The pregnant woman, who appeared to be named Claire based on what he overheard, was glowing with happiness as she shared details about her upcoming due date. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said with his practiced professional smile. "Welcome to Chateau Blanc. My name is Marcus, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. Can I start you off with some drinks or perhaps one of our signature appetizers?" The table's response was polite but distant. Marcus sensed the subtle shift in energy that often occurred when he served certain tables. It was nothing overt, just a coolness in their demeanor that he had unfortunately become accustomed to over the years. He pushed the feeling aside and focused on providing exceptional service, as he always did. Claire's husband, a man named David with graying temples and an expensive watch, ordered a bottle of their finest red wine for the table. "Make sure it's the 2018 vintage," he specified, his tone carrying an undertone of superiority. "And we'll need 1 sparkling water for my wife, obviously." Marcus nodded and made careful notes of their drink orders. The other couples requested various cocktails and wines, creating a substantial beverage order that would require multiple trips from the bar. As he turned to leave, he heard one of the women at the table make a comment under her breath about hoping the service would be adequate for such an important evening. The comment stung, but Marcus had developed thick skin over the years. He had worked hard to earn his position at Chateau Blanc, one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. His managers valued his reliability, his knowledge of the menu and wine list, and his ability to handle difficult situations with grace. He wasn't going to let subtle prejudices affect his performance. At the bar, Marcus carefully reviewed the drink order with the bartender and wine steward. The requested vintage was indeed expensive, costing more than Marcus made in a week. He watched as the wine steward selected the bottle from the temperature-controlled wine cellar, handling it with the reverence reserved for such valuable vintages. While the cocktails were being prepared, Marcus returned to table 12 with bread and olive oil, noting that their conversation had shifted to discussing vacation homes and private school options for their future children. The disparity between their world and his own was stark, but Marcus had learned not to dwell on such differences. He focused instead on doing his job well, knowing that excellent service could sometimes bridge social divides. The wine steward accompanied Marcus back to the table, carrying the expensive bottle with ceremonial care. David examined the label with the scrutiny of a connoisseur, nodding his approval before the wine was opened and poured for tasting. The ritual proceeded smoothly, with David declaring the wine acceptable after a thoughtful sip. Marcus began the process of serving wine to each guest, working clockwise around the table as he had been trained. His movements were precise and practiced, the result of thousands of hours of experience. He poured carefully, ensuring each glass received the proper amount without a single drop spilled on the pristine white tablecloth. Everything was proceeding perfectly until he reached Claire. As Marcus leaned forward to pour her husband's wine, Claire suddenly shifted in her chair to retrieve something from her purse on the floor. The unexpected movement caught Marcus off guard, and in that split second of distraction, the bottle tilted too far. A generous splash of deep red wine cascaded from the bottle directly onto Claire's light-colored dress. The liquid spread quickly across the expensive fabric, creating a dark stain that seemed to grow larger by the second. The entire table fell silent, and Marcus felt his heart stop as he realized what had happened. "Oh my God," Claire gasped, looking down at her ruined dress in shock. The wine had not only stained her clothing, but had also splashed onto her hands and the edge of the table. The beautiful navy dress, which Marcus now realized must have cost more than his monthly rent, was completely destroyed. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Marcus stood frozen, still holding the wine bottle as 6 pairs of eyes stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to barely contained fury. He could feel the blood draining from his face as the magnitude of the situation sank in. David's face turned an alarming shade of red as he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the restaurant and causing other diners to turn and stare. "That dress cost more than you make in a year." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I am so sorry," he stammered, setting down the wine bottle with trembling hands. "Please let me get some towels and see what we can do to clean this up. I'll speak with my manager immediately about covering the cost of the dress." But even as he spoke, Marcus could see in their faces that this incident was going to be about much more than a stained dress. The way they were looking at him, the whispered comments already beginning around the table, and the gathering crowd of onlookers all suggested that this moment was about to change everything in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The chaos that erupted at table 12 spread through the restaurant like wildfire. David's angry voice carried across the dining room, attracting the attention of every patron and staff member within earshot. Claire sat motionless, staring down at her ruined dress while tears began to form in her eyes. The dark wine stain had spread across the delicate fabric, creating an irreversible mess that seemed to symbolize something much deeper than a simple accident. "This is completely unacceptable," David continued, his voice rising with each word. "We're celebrating one of the most important nights of our lives, and this incompetent server has ruined everything." His finger pointed accusingly at Marcus, who stood paralyzed by the unfolding disaster. The expensive wine continued to drip from the table onto the restaurant's pristine carpet. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of stares from other diners, many of whom had stopped their own conversations to witness the commotion. He could see restaurant manager Elizabeth Hayes making her way quickly across the dining room, her expression serious and concerned. Behind her followed 2 other staff members carrying towels and cleaning supplies, though everyone knew it was far too late to salvage Claire's dress. "Sir, I cannot express how sorry I am," Marcus said again, his professional training helping him maintain some composure despite his inner turmoil. "This was a complete accident, and I take full responsibility. Please allow us to make this right in whatever way possible." One of the other women at the table, a blonde in her 40s wearing diamond earrings, leaned forward with a cold smile. "Oh, I'm sure you'll try to make it right," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But do you have any idea what you've just destroyed?" "That's a designer maternity dress that Claire had specially ordered for tonight. You can't just walk into a department store and replace something like that." Claire finally spoke, her voice shaky but controlled. "It's okay, David," she said quietly, placing a hand on her husband's arm. "It was an accident. These things happen." But even as she spoke these gracious words, Marcus could see the disappointment and embarrassment in her eyes. This was clearly a special evening that had been completely ruined. Manager Elizabeth Hayes reached the table just as the situation seemed to be escalating further. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and an authoritative presence, she had managed the restaurant for over a decade and had dealt with countless difficult situations. However, the tension at this particular table felt different, more charged than usual. "Good evening, folks," Elizabeth said in her calm, professional voice. "I'm Elizabeth Hayes, the general manager here at Chateau Blanc. I understand we've had an unfortunate accident, and I want to personally ensure that we handle this situation appropriately." Her eyes briefly met Marcus's, and he could see both concern and disappointment in her expression. David turned his fury toward the manager, his face still flushed with anger. Your server has completely destroyed my wife's expensive dress and ruined what was supposed to be a perfect evening, he declared. We demand immediate action. This level of carelessness is absolutely inexcusable, especially from someone working in an establishment of this caliber. Elizabeth nodded sympathetically while quickly assessing the damage. The wine stain was indeed devastating, covering a significant portion of Claire's dress and showing no signs of being salvageable. The cost of replacing such a garment would likely be substantial, and she knew the restaurant would need to make significant concessions to maintain their reputation. Of course, we will absolutely cover the full cost of replacing the dress, Elizabeth assured them. We will also comp your entire evening, including all food and beverages. Additionally, we'd like to invite you back as our guests for another celebration dinner at your convenience. She paused, glancing at Marcus before continuing. We take full responsibility for this incident. Marcus felt a growing knot in his stomach as he realized the implications of what had happened. Not only would the restaurant face significant financial costs, but his own job was now clearly in jeopardy. He had never had an incident like this in his 3 years at Chateau Blanc, but he knew that accidents of this magnitude often led to immediate termination, regardless of an employee's previous record. The third woman at the table, who had been quietly observing the situation, suddenly spoke up. You know, she said slowly, her eyes fixed on Marcus with an unsettling intensity. I have to wonder if this was really just an accident. I mean, what are the odds that something like this would happen to us tonight of all nights? Her comment sent a chill through the air that seemed to affect everyone within earshot. Marcus felt his heart racing as the implication of her words became clear. The suggestion that the incident might have been intentional was not only false but deeply offensive. However, he knew that defending himself too vigorously could make the situation even worse. Ma'am, I can assure you that this was completely accidental, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. I have been working here for 3 years without any incidents like this. I would never intentionally harm a guest or damage their property. This was simply an unfortunate accident that occurred when Mrs. Claire moved unexpectedly while I was pouring. David's eyes narrowed at this explanation. So now you're blaming my wife for your mistake? He demanded. That's rich. First you destroy her dress, and now you're trying to make it her fault. No, sir, that's not what I meant at all. Marcus replied quickly, realizing how his words could be misinterpreted. I was simply explaining the sequence of events. The fault is entirely mine, and I take complete responsibility for what happened. Elizabeth stepped in to diffuse the escalating tension. Please, let's focus on moving forward constructively, she said firmly. We've acknowledged our responsibility and offered appropriate compensation. Perhaps we could arrange for Mrs. Claire to visit one of the city's finest boutiques tomorrow, with all expenses covered by the restaurant, to find a replacement dress. Claire nodded weakly, still looking down at her ruined outfit. I appreciate the offer, she said softly. But this dress was special. It was the first maternity dress I bought after we found out we were having a baby. You can't really replace the sentimental value. The comment struck Marcus deeply, making him realize that the damage extended far beyond the monetary cost of the dress. This couple was celebrating what was clearly a significant milestone in their lives, and his accident had tainted what should have been a perfect memory. The guilt he felt was overwhelming, and he found himself wishing desperately that he could somehow undo the past few minutes. As the conversation continued, Marcus noticed that other diners were still watching their table with obvious interest. Some appeared sympathetic to the situation, while others seemed to be making their own judgments about what had occurred. The whispered conversations and pointed stares made him acutely aware that this incident would likely become restaurant gossip that would follow him for weeks or months to come. The blonde woman leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but cold. You know, Elizabeth, she said to the manager, I think there needs to be some serious consideration about whether your staff is properly trained to serve clientele of our caliber. This kind of incident reflects poorly on the entire establishment. Her words carried an undertone that made Marcus's skin crawl. There was something about the way she emphasized certain phrases that suggested layers of meaning beyond the obvious complaint about service quality. He could sense that this situation was evolving into something much more complex and potentially damaging than a simple accident with a wine bottle. The situation at table 12 continued to deteriorate as more restaurant patrons became aware of the commotion. Marcus could feel the collective gaze of the entire dining room focused on him, and the whispers from nearby tables created a constant buzz of judgment and speculation. Elizabeth was doing her best to manage the crisis, but the tension in the air suggested that this incident was far from over. David pulled out his phone and began taking photos of Claire's stained dress, the wine-soaked tablecloth, and even Marcus himself. "I'm documenting everything," he announced loudly. "This is going straight to social media and every restaurant review site I can find. People need to know what kind of service they can expect at Chateau Blanc." The threat of social media exposure sent a wave of panic through Marcus. In today's digital age, a negative viral post could destroy both his career and the restaurant's reputation overnight. He had seen other service workers become the targets of online harassment after incidents far less significant than this one. The thought of his face and name being associated with this accident spreading across the internet was terrifying. Claire seemed uncomfortable with her husband's escalating response. "David, please," she said quietly, placing her hand on his phone to lower it. "I don't think we need to make this into a bigger spectacle than it already is." The manager has offered to make things right, but David was clearly not interested in de-escalation. "No, Claire," he said firmly. "This is about accountability. If we don't speak up, this kind of careless behavior will continue. Other customers deserve to know what they're walking into when they choose to dine here." The blonde woman, who had introduced herself earlier as Patricia, smiled coldly as she watched the drama unfold.
"David's absolutely right," she said, her voice carrying across several nearby tables.
Standards have clearly declined in service establishments when incidents like this can occur. I mean, really, how difficult is it to pour wine without spilling it all over a customer? Marcus felt his cheeks burning with embarrassment and frustration. Patricia's comments seemed designed to humiliate him as much as possible, and her tone suggested that she was enjoying his discomfort. There was something particularly cruel about the way she emphasized certain words, as if she wanted to ensure that everyone in the restaurant understood that he had failed in the most basic aspects of his job. Elizabeth was growing visibly frustrated with the escalating situation. "I understand your disappointment," she said, addressing the entire table but looking particularly at David and Patricia. "However, I believe we've made a very generous offer to rectify this situation. Perhaps we could discuss the details of compensation privately, so other guests can continue enjoying their evening." Patricia laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. "Oh, I don't think privacy is necessary," she said. "After all, the incident happened in full view of everyone. Why should the resolution be hidden away? I think other diners have a right to see how the restaurant handles situations like this." Marcus realized that Patricia seemed intent on prolonging his public humiliation. Every comment she made appeared calculated to draw more attention to the incident and to cast him in the worst possible light. He began to suspect that her motivations went beyond simple disappointment about a ruined dress. The third woman at the table, who had been mostly quiet during the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Patricia, don't you think you're being a bit harsh?" she said gently. The young man clearly didn't mean to spill the wine. "These accidents happen even in the best restaurants." Patricia's expression hardened as she turned toward her friend. "Oh, Susan," she said dismissively, "you're always too quick to excuse poor performance. Standards exist for a reason. When you pay premium prices, you should expect premium service. It's really that simple." Susan looked uncomfortable with Patricia's response but didn't pursue the argument further. Marcus got the impression that Patricia was someone who dominated social situations and wasn't used to being challenged by her friends. The dynamic at the table was becoming clearer, with Patricia apparently driving much of the hostility, while others seemed more willing to move past the incident. Claire spoke up again, this time with more firmness in her voice. "I appreciate everyone's concern," she said, "but I think we should focus on finding a practical solution rather than dwelling on what happened. The dress is ruined, but no one was hurt, and that's what really matters." Her reasonable response seemed to momentarily calm the situation, but Patricia wasn't finished. "Claire, sweetie," she said with false sympathy, "you're being far too gracious about this. That dress was perfect for your announcement tonight, and now that moment is ruined forever. Some things can't be replaced or compensated for adequately." Marcus felt a growing sense of unease about Patricia's persistent emphasis on making the situation as dramatic as possible. Most reasonable people would have accepted the manager's generous offer and moved on, but Patricia seemed determined to extract maximum punishment for his mistake. Her behavior was starting to feel personal rather than simply upset about poor service. Elizabeth tried once more to bring the situation to a reasonable conclusion. "I've offered to cover the full cost of the dress, comp the entire evening, and provide a return dinner for the entire party," she said. "Additionally, I'm prepared to offer a significant gift certificate for future visits. I believe this represents fair compensation for the inconvenience caused." David looked at Patricia, as if seeking her approval for the offered settlement. The fact that he seemed to defer to her opinion about his own wife's situation struck Marcus as odd. Patricia appeared to consider the offer carefully, but her expression suggested that she had additional demands in mind. "The monetary compensation is a start," Patricia said slowly, "but I don't think it addresses the core issue here. This incident demonstrates a fundamental problem with staff training and supervision. What assurance do we have that similar incidents won't happen to future customers?" Elizabeth's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, I can assure you that we have extensive training programs for all our staff members," she said. "This was an isolated incident, and we will certainly review our procedures to prevent similar accidents in the future. Will you?" Patricia asked pointedly, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "Because it seems to me that the obvious solution is to ensure that staff members who can't handle basic service responsibilities are removed from positions where they can cause such problems." The implication was unmistakable. Patricia was demanding that Marcus be fired as part of the resolution to this incident. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he felt his knees weaken as the full scope of what was happening became clear. Marcus had worked hard to build his career in the restaurant industry. Chateau Blanc was not just a job for him. It was a stepping stone toward his dream of eventually opening his own establishment. Being fired from such a prestigious restaurant would make it extremely difficult to find comparable employment elsewhere, especially if the incident became public knowledge through social media. Elizabeth's expression grew stern as she processed Patricia's demand. "Ma'am, personnel decisions are not something we discuss with customers," she said firmly. "We handle employment matters internally, based on our own policies and procedures." Patricia smiled coldly at the response. "I see," she said. "So you're more interested in protecting incompetent employees than in ensuring customer satisfaction. That's very telling about your priorities as a business." The confrontation had reached a critical point, and Marcus could see that his future hung in the balance of whatever happened next. The tension in the restaurant had reached a breaking point when an unexpected voice cut through the heated argument. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing this conversation, and I feel compelled to say something." Everyone at table 12 turned to see who had spoken. Standing beside their table was Dr. James Mitchell, a distinguished African-American man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit. Marcus recognized him as a regular customer who typically dined alone at corner tables, always polite but preferring privacy. Dr. Mitchell was known among the staff as a generous tipper who never caused problems and always treated everyone with respect. Patricia looked annoyed by the interruption. "I'm sorry, but this is a private matter between our party and the restaurant management," she said dismissively. "I don't believe your input is necessary or appropriate." Dr. Mitchell smiled calmly, seemingly unbothered by Patricia's rudeness. "Actually, I believe it is appropriate," he said in a measured tone. "You see, I've been dining at this establishment for over 5 years, and I've had the pleasure of being served by Marcus on numerous occasions. He's one of the most professional and competent servers I've ever encountered." Marcus felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, though he remained silent. He remembered Dr. Mitchell well. The doctor always requested his section when making reservations and had even complimented his service to other managers in the past. However, he hadn't expected the distinguished gentleman to involve himself in this situation. David bristled at the stranger's defense of Marcus. "With all due respect, sir, you weren't here to witness what happened," he said sharply. "This server destroyed my wife's expensive dress through pure carelessness. Your previous experiences don't excuse tonight's incompetence." Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right that I didn't witness the specific incident," he agreed. "But I did observe the aftermath, and what I've seen troubles me deeply. Not because of any spilled wine, but because of the response to what was clearly an accident." Patricia's eyes narrowed dangerously. And what exactly is that supposed to mean? She demanded. Are you suggesting that we're overreacting to having an expensive dress ruined during what was supposed to be a special evening? I'm suggesting, Dr. Mitchell said quietly, that the level of vitriol and public humiliation being directed at this young man seems disproportionate to the actual incident. I've witnessed genuine accidents in restaurants before, and I've never seen such a deliberate attempt to destroy someone's career and reputation over spilled wine. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Several nearby diners had turned to listen to the conversation, and Marcus could sense that the dynamic in the room was shifting. Dr. Mitchell's calm, authoritative presence was commanding attention in a way that contrasted sharply with the angry outbursts from Table 12. Claire looked between Dr. Mitchell and her companions, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. I don't think anyone is trying to destroy anyone's career, she said weakly. We're just upset about what happened, which I think is understandable. Dr. Mitchell's gaze softened as he looked at Claire. Of course it's understandable to be upset, he said gently. But there's a difference between expressing disappointment and demanding that someone lose their livelihood over an accident. I have to ask myself why this particular incident has generated such an extreme response. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. How dare you imply that our reaction has anything to do with anything other than poor service? She said, her voice rising to near shouting levels. The race card, really? That's where you're going with this? The word race seemed to electrify the entire restaurant. Conversations at other tables stopped completely, and Marcus felt every eye in the room focusing on their confrontation. He had hoped that his suspicions about the underlying motivations for Patricia's behavior were wrong, but her defensive reaction suggested otherwise. Dr. Mitchell remained perfectly calm despite Patricia's outburst. I didn't mention race, he said quietly. You did. I simply commented on what appears to be a disproportionate response to an accident. The fact that you immediately brought up race suggests that perhaps it's more relevant to this situation than you'd like to admit. Elizabeth stepped forward, clearly desperate to regain control of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to lower our voices and focus on resolving this matter privately, she said firmly. This level of disruption is affecting all of our guests. But Dr. Mitchell wasn't finished. You know, he continued, his voice carrying easily across the now silent dining room, I've been observing social dynamics for many years, both as a physician and as someone who has unfortunately experienced various forms of discrimination. What I've witnessed here tonight follows a very familiar pattern. David joined Patricia in standing, his face flushed with anger. This is absolutely ridiculous, he declared. You're turning an accident with a wine bottle into some kind of civil rights issue. That's not only inappropriate, it's offensive to people who have actually experienced real discrimination. Dr. Mitchell's expression grew stern. Real discrimination? He repeated. Sir, I've experienced quite a bit of real discrimination in my 63 years. I know what it looks like, and I know how it manifests in modern society. It's rarely as obvious as it once was, but it's often more insidious. Marcus felt simultaneously grateful for Dr. Mitchell's support and terrified that the situation was spiraling completely out of control. The entire restaurant was now focused on their conversation, and he knew that whatever happened next would likely determine not just his immediate future, but potentially his entire career in the hospitality industry. Susan, the third woman at the table, looked increasingly uncomfortable as the argument escalated. Maybe we should just accept the restaurant's offer and leave, she suggested quietly. This has gotten way out of hand. Patricia whirled around to face her friend. Susan, don't you dare back down now, she hissed. This man is trying to make us look like racists simply because we demanded proper service. We have every right to expect competence from restaurant staff regardless of their background. Dr. Mitchell smiled sadly. And there it is, he said. The classic defense. We're not racist, we just expect competence. As if the two are mutually exclusive, or as if the definition of competence somehow changes based on who's being evaluated. The conversation had reached a point where Marcus realized that his individual situation had become secondary to a much larger confrontation about prejudice and social dynamics. While part of him was grateful that someone was challenging the treatment he had received, he was also aware that this public debate might ultimately make his position even more precarious. Claire finally spoke up with more authority than she had shown all evening. "Stop," she said firmly, addressing everyone at the table. "Just stop. This is supposed to be a celebration of our baby, and instead it's turned into a horrible argument that's making everyone uncomfortable." She turned to Marcus with an expression that seemed genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry this happened to your dress, and I'm sorry about all of this," Marcus said quietly, seizing the opportunity to address her directly. "I truly never meant for any of this to occur." Claire nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know you didn't," she said softly. "I could tell it was an accident from the moment it happened. I just wanted to have a nice dinner with our friends to celebrate the baby. And now everything is ruined." Her emotional response seemed to affect everyone at the table, even Patricia, whose aggressive stance softened slightly. However, the damage to the evening and potentially to Marcus's future had already been done. The question now was whether Dr. Mitchell's intervention would help or hurt his situation in the long run. The emotional weight of Claire's words seemed to shift the entire atmosphere in the restaurant. Her genuine distress over the ruined celebration touched something in the hearts of everyone present, including several diners at nearby tables who had been silently observing the confrontation. The focus began to move away from accusations and blame toward the sadness of a special moment that had been completely derailed. Dr. Mitchell's expression softened as he looked at Claire. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize if my comments have added to your distress," he said gently. "That was never my intention. You're absolutely right that this should be a joyful evening for you and your husband. Perhaps there's a way to salvage something positive from this situation." Marcus watched as Claire wiped tears from her eyes, her hand instinctively moving to rest on her pregnant belly. The sight of her distress made his own guilt intensify beyond anything he had felt since the accident occurred. This wasn't just about a stained dress anymore. It was about memories that should have been treasured forever but were now tainted by conflict and controversy. Patricia, perhaps recognizing that her aggressive approach was making her look unsympathetic in front of the other diners, attempted to modify her tone. "Of course we're all sorry that Claire is upset," she said, though her voice still carried an edge of defensiveness. "But that doesn't change the fact that this incident occurred due to careless service. Sympathy doesn't repair the damage that's been done." Susan finally found her voice again, speaking directly to her friends rather than to the broader audience that had gathered around their conversation. "Patricia, David, I think we need to seriously consider whether continuing this argument is helping anyone," she said. "Claire clearly wants to move past this, and I think we should respect that." David looked torn between supporting his wife's desire to end the confrontation and backing up Patricia's demands for what she considered justice. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to other customers," he said, though his tone was noticeably less aggressive than it had been earlier. "If we don't speak up, how will the restaurant know that changes need to be made?" Elizabeth, who had been trying to manage the crisis while protecting both her restaurant's reputation and her employee, saw an opportunity to redirect the conversation toward resolution. "I can assure you that this incident will result in a comprehensive review of our service procedures," she said. "We take every customer concern seriously, and we will implement any necessary improvements to prevent similar accidents." Dr. Mitchell nodded approvingly at the manager's response. "That sounds like a reasonable approach," he said. "Learning from mistakes and improving procedures is exactly how professional establishments should handle these situations. It's far more productive than seeking to punish individuals for honest accidents." Marcus felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps the situation could be resolved without the complete destruction of his career. However, he was still acutely aware that the events of the evening would follow him for a long time, regardless of how the immediate confrontation was resolved. The stress and humiliation of the past hour had taken a significant toll on his confidence and his faith in the fairness of the world. Claire looked around the table at her companions, then at Dr. Mitchell, Elizabeth, and finally at Marcus. "I want to say something," she announced, her voice stronger than it had been since the incident occurred. "This accident happened during what was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of my life. But you know what? The accident itself isn't what ruined the evening." Everyone waited for her to continue, sensing that she was about to say something significant. Claire took a deep breath and looked directly at Patricia. "What ruined the evening was the way we responded to it. The anger, the accusations, The public humiliation of someone who made an honest mistake, that's what turned a simple accident into something ugly and memorable for all the wrong reasons. Patricia's face flushed with embarrassment and anger at being called out by her friend. "Claire, I was trying to protect your interests," she protested. "I thought you'd want us to stand up for you when you were wronged." "But I wasn't wronged," Claire replied firmly. "I was accidentally splashed with wine. It's not the same thing. And even if I had been deliberately mistreated, I wouldn't want someone to lose their job over it. That's not who I am, and it's not the kind of person I want to raise my child to be." Her words carried the weight of moral authority that seemed to resonate throughout the restaurant. Several diners at nearby tables nodded approvingly, and Marcus felt tears forming in his own eyes as he realized that someone was finally defending not just his actions, but his basic human dignity. David reached over and took his wife's hand, his expression showing a mixture of pride and shame. "You're right, Claire," he said quietly. "I let my anger get the better of me. I was so focused on the cost of the dress and the disruption to our evening that I forgot about treating people with basic decency." The admission seemed to deflate much of the remaining tension in the room. Dr. Mitchell smiled approvingly at both Claire and David, clearly pleased to see the situation moving toward a more constructive resolution. "It takes courage to admit when we've let our emotions override our better judgment," he said. "That's the kind of character that will make you excellent parents." Patricia, however, was not ready to concede the point entirely. "I still think you're all being naive," she said, though her voice lacked the venom it had carried earlier. "Standards exist for a reason, and when people fail to meet them, there have to be consequences. Otherwise, how do we maintain quality in anything?" Susan finally stood up to her domineering friend. "Patricia, sometimes the most important standard is how we treat other people when they make mistakes," she said firmly. "And by that measure, I think we've failed tonight far more than Marcus did." The comment clearly stung Patricia, who looked around the table and realized that she had lost the support of her friends. The other diners in the restaurant were no longer watching the confrontation with curiosity or entertainment. Many were looking at her with obvious disapproval. Her campaign to punish Marcus had backfired, making her appear petty and cruel rather than justifiably angry. Marcus finally found the courage to speak directly to Claire. "Mrs. Claire, I want you to know that I will never forget your kindness tonight," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You could have joined in demanding that I be fired and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you chose to show compassion to someone who accidentally ruined something important to you. That means more to me than I can express." Claire smiled through her tears. "Marcus, I hope you'll remember that most people are basically good, even when they don't always show it. Tonight brought out both the worst and the best in people, but I think the best is what really matters." Elizabeth, who had been quietly observing this exchange, stepped forward with a proposal. "I have an idea," she said. "What if we could turn this evening into something positive after all? Marcus, you mentioned that you've been working in the restaurant industry for several years. What are your long-term goals?" Marcus was surprised by the question, but answered honestly. "I'm hoping to eventually open my own restaurant someday," he said. "I've been saving money and learning everything I can about the business. Working here has been an incredible education." Dr. Mitchell's eyes lit up with interest. "Really?" he said. "What kind of restaurant are you hoping to open? What's your vision?" For the first time all evening, Marcus felt comfortable talking about something he was passionate about. "I want to create a place that serves excellent food, but also makes everyone feel welcome, regardless of their background or how much money they have," he said. "I believe good food and hospitality can bring people together and break down barriers." Claire clapped her hands together, her face brightening for the first time since the wine incident. "That sounds wonderful," she said enthusiastically. "David, didn't you say your company was looking for new restaurant investments? This could be perfect timing." David looked thoughtful as he considered his wife's suggestion. "Actually, we are expanding our hospitality portfolio," he admitted. "And after tonight, I think investing in someone who shares your values about treating people with dignity would be exactly the right choice." The conversation had taken such an unexpected turn that everyone present seemed stunned by the rapid transformation from conflict to opportunity. Patricia looked particularly bewildered, as if she couldn't understand how her campaign to destroy Marcus had somehow evolved into a discussion about helping him achieve his dreams. Dr. Mitchell smiled broadly. You know, I've been looking for meaningful ways to invest in young entrepreneurs who are committed to making positive changes in their communities, he said. Marcus, would you be interested in discussing your business plans in more detail sometime? Marcus felt like he was dreaming. The evening that had started as his worst nightmare was somehow transforming into the biggest opportunity of his life. However, he was still cautious about getting his hopes up too high, knowing that people sometimes made promises in emotional moments that they didn't follow through on later. Elizabeth cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention back to the immediate situation. This is all very exciting, she said, but we still need to address the practical matters at hand. Marcus, you handled this difficult situation with professionalism and grace. I want you to know that your job here is secure, and I'll be writing a commendation for your personnel file about how you managed this crisis. The relief Marcus felt at hearing those words was overwhelming. Not only was he not being fired, but his manager was actually praising his handling of the situation. The validation meant almost as much to him as the potential business opportunities that had emerged from the conversation. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the empty space that would soon become Unity Kitchen, his dream restaurant finally becoming reality. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the construction dust that danced in the air as contractors worked to bring his vision to life. The past half-year had been a whirlwind of business planning, legal paperwork, and design decisions, but every challenge had been worth it to reach this moment. The partnership that had emerged from that fateful evening at Chateau Blanc had proven to be more substantial and meaningful than anyone could have imagined. David's investment firm had provided the primary funding, while Dr. Mitchell had contributed both financial support and invaluable business mentorship. More importantly, both men had become genuine friends who shared Marcus's vision of creating a restaurant that would serve as a bridge between different communities. Claire had become an unexpected but enthusiastic advocate for the project. Despite the unfortunate beginning to their relationship, she had thrown herself into helping Marcus plan every detail of the restaurant. Her background in interior design had proven invaluable in creating a space that felt both elegant and welcoming. The irony that a spilled glass of wine had led to such a meaningful collaboration was not lost on any of them. The restaurant's design reflected Marcus's core values of inclusivity and community building. The dining room featured a mix of intimate tables for couples and larger communal tables, where strangers might find themselves sharing meals and conversations. The menu would offer both upscale dishes and comfort food at various price points, ensuring that the restaurant could serve everyone from business executives to families on tight budgets. Patricia had been notably absent from any of the planning or celebration events. Her behavior that night at Chateau Blanc had cost her the friendship of both Claire and Susan, who had been appalled by her attempts to destroy Marcus's career over an accident. The incident had served as a wake-up call for both women about the kind of person Patricia really was beneath her polished exterior. Dr. Mitchell had become not just an investor, but a mentor figure in Marcus's life. Their weekly meetings had evolved from business discussions into wide-ranging conversations about life, goals, and the responsibility that comes with success. The older man's wisdom and experience had helped Marcus navigate the complex world of restaurant ownership while staying true to his original vision. "It's starting to look like a real restaurant," came a familiar voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Claire entering the space, carefully navigating the construction materials with her 8-month pregnant belly. David followed behind her, carrying coffee for everyone and wearing a hard hat that looked slightly ridiculous on his usually formal appearance. "Claire, you shouldn't be walking around a construction site," Marcus said with concern, though he was delighted to see her. "The baby could come any day now." Claire laughed and patted her belly affectionately. "This little one has been very patient with all our restaurant planning meetings," she said. "I think he or she is excited to see the finished product too. Besides, I wanted to check on the progress of the nursery corner you're creating." One of Marcus's innovations for Unity Kitchen was a small, comfortable area designed specifically for families with young children. Complete with changing stations, high chairs, and even a small play area, it would allow parents to enjoy quality dining experiences without worrying about disturbing other guests. The idea had come from his own childhood memories of rarely being able to afford family dinners at nice restaurants. David set down the coffee and surveyed the space with obvious pride. You know, Marcus, when I first invested in this project, I thought it was primarily about making amends for that awful evening, he admitted. But watching your vision come together has been incredibly inspiring. You're creating something that's going to make a real difference in this community. The comment reflected how much David had changed since that night at Chateau Blanc. The anger and entitlement he had displayed had given way to genuine humility and a desire to use his resources for positive purposes. His friendship with Marcus had taught him valuable lessons about privilege assumption and the importance of seeing people as individuals rather than stereotypes. Dr. Mitchell arrived just as the conversation was getting started, carrying a stack of applications from potential employees. Word about Unity Kitchen had spread throughout the restaurant industry, and Marcus was overwhelmed by the number of people who wanted to be part of his vision. Many of the applicants were servers, cooks, and managers who had experienced their own challenges with discrimination and were excited about working for someone who understood their struggles. I've reviewed the latest batch of applications, Dr. Mitchell said, settling into one of the chairs that had been brought in for their meetings. You've got some incredibly talented people interested in working here. The head chef candidate from downtown particularly impressed me with her commitment to community engagement. Marcus had been careful to build his team with people who shared his values rather than simply hiring based on credentials alone. Each potential employee went through an extensive interview process that focused as much on character and empathy as on technical skills. He wanted Unity Kitchen to be staffed by people who would treat every customer with dignity and respect. Elizabeth from Chateau Blanc had also played an unexpected role in the restaurant's development. She had agreed to serve as a consultant during the opening phase, helping Marcus avoid common pitfalls that new restaurants faced. Her experience managing high-end establishments had proven invaluable in creating systems and procedures that would ensure consistent quality and service. Speaking of the team, Marcus said, I have some news. Elizabeth offered me something I never expected. He paused, savoring the moment before continuing. She wants to leave Chateau Blanc and become Unity Kitchen's general manager. The announcement was met with surprised but delighted reactions from everyone present. Elizabeth's decision to join the project represented a significant vote of confidence in Marcus's vision. Her reputation in the industry would lend credibility to the new restaurant and help establish it as a serious player in the city's competitive dining scene. Claire clapped her hands excitedly, then winced slightly as the baby kicked in response to her enthusiasm. That's wonderful news, she said. Elizabeth is exactly the kind of person who can help you maintain your standards while keeping true to your mission. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Susan, who had become a regular supporter of the project despite her initial connection to it through Patricia. She carried a large bouquet of flowers and wore a broad smile that suggested she had good news to share. I hope you don't mind the interruption, Susan said, but I couldn't wait to tell you that the review in City Magazine is going to be fantastic. The food writer spent an hour interviewing me about the concept and the story behind the restaurant. She was fascinated by how it all started. The publicity surrounding Unity Kitchen had been overwhelmingly positive, with several media outlets picking up on the inspiring story of how a wine-spilling accident had led to the creation of a restaurant focused on bringing people together. Marcus had been careful to frame the narrative in a way that emphasized hope and redemption, rather than dwelling on the negative aspects of that original encounter. As the group continued discussing plans for the restaurant's opening, Marcus reflected on how profoundly his life had changed since that terrible night 6 months ago. What had started as his worst nightmare had ultimately become the catalyst for achieving his biggest dreams. More importantly, he had gained a circle of friends and mentors who genuinely cared about his success and shared his vision for creating positive change. The accident with the wine had revealed both the worst and best aspects of human nature. Patricia's cruelty and prejudice had been balanced by Claire's compassion, Dr. Mitchell's courage, and David's willingness to grow and change. The experience had taught Marcus that while discrimination and unfairness certainly existed, there were also people willing to stand up for what was right and support those who had been wronged. Unity Kitchen was scheduled to open in just 3 weeks, and Marcus felt ready for the challenge. The restaurant would serve as a testament to the power of turning negative experiences into positive outcomes. Every meal served, Every community event hosted and every job provided would be a small victory against the kind of prejudice and hatred that had almost destroyed his career. As the sun set over the construction site, casting long shadows across the future dining room, Marcus smiled with satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he could simply enjoy the knowledge that dreams, even those born from disasters, could indeed come true with the support of good people and unwavering determination.